Behind the glass walls of corporate power, a man stands unseen, his presence dismissed, his worth questioned not for what he does, but for who he is. A black man navigating a world built to ignore him, to silence him, to erase him. Whispers spread like wildfire, mocking his background, doubting his place among the elite. Yet beneath the surface, far from the eyes of those who judge, a quiet storm gathers, an unstoppable force ready to rewrite the rules and shatter every expectation. This isn't just a story of survival. It's a reckoning long overdue. If you want to witness a journey where injustice meets its match, where silence turns into power, then like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Your voice matters in this fight for truth. Kalen Rhodes stepped through the revolving glass doors of Verrelia Corporation at 7:45 a.m., his shoes silent against the polished marble as the city's morning glow bounced off the high-rise steel and chrome. He walked with composure, his black leather portfolio tucked under one arm, the only detail breaking the formal monotony being a small metallic pin on the strap, a discreet emblem from his community college. There was nothing flashy about him, but everything was intentional. He adjusted his cuff as he passed the security desk, offered a polite nod, and continued toward the elevators, unaware that in the rooms above, his arrival had already been the subject of side glances and quiet laughs. The receptionist barely looked up when he gave his name, simply gestured toward the elevator bay and directed him to the 12th floor without confirming his role or checking the schedule. Orientations already started upstairs. Take 12B. Kalen blinked. Orientation? He was a newly promoted director of strategic logistics, with 3 years of metrics that outperformed every regional team. But he didn't push back. He nodded, thanked her, and made his way up. The 12th floor buzzed with onboarding energy. New hires in freshly pressed clothes clutched packets, watched intro videos play in loops across the mounted screens, and filled the air with hopeful chatter. Kalen paused in the doorway, uncertain. There was no name placard for him, no assigned seat, no welcome folder. He hovered awkwardly, scanning the room. A woman at the back, mid-30s with a tight bun and a corporate polo, noticed his hesitation and approached. When he explained softly that he may have been sent to the wrong floor, her eyes flicked from his face to his badge, then lingered on the college pin. Her expression didn't shift, but her mouth formed a tight smile. "Give me a moment." She vanished through a side door, and Kalen was left standing as the onboarding group stole glances his way. 5 minutes passed, then 10. He shifted from one foot to the other as HR assistants brought bagels and coffee to the others and began distributing swag bags with branded mugs and notebooks. When the door finally reopened, it wasn't the woman returning. It was a man Kalen recognized from a company video. Baron Teague, senior lead for strategic assets, strolled out, barely glanced at Kalen, and chuckled while muttering over his shoulder to someone inside. "Yeah, he's still standing there. No idea what he's doing here." Kalen heard every word. His chest tightened. He remained still. Eventually, a junior associate emerged with a clipboard and a tense jaw, asking Kalen to hang back in a quiet office down the hall while they sorted out the schedule mix-up. No apology, no eye contact, just a vague instruction and a door. The office was dimly lit and smelled like printer ink and old carpet. Kalen sat alone, hands resting on his case, the distant murmur of laughter and first-day speeches bleeding in through the walls. He checked his watch. 40 minutes passed, then an hour. Finally, another staffer appeared, briskly informing him that corporate communications needed him for a team photo session. "Company spotlight for the quarterly newsletter," she said with artificial brightness. Kalen stood, straightened his collar, and followed her. The session was held on the mezzanine outside the executive wing. Morning light poured in from 2-story windows. The company's rising stars were already in formation, robed in sharp suits, sleek dresses, confident posture. Kalen moved to take his place beside the director of strategy and a VP from legal. A few heads turned. There were whispers. One of the comms managers stepped forward and said, still smiling, that they would just do a few quick core team shots first. And could Kalen wait off to the side for a moment? Just a moment. Everyone else remained where they were. Kalen stepped aside, Flashes went off. Different angles. Laughter. Some leaned in for selfies with the photographer. A tray of mimosas was brought in. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. At no point was Kalen called back into the frame. One by one, the staff began dispersing. No one approached him. He left without being acknowledged. Back at his temporary desk, still no formal workspace assignment, Kalen pulled up the company LinkedIn page. The post was already live. Virelia's future. Meet our next-gen leaders. The same photo from a mezzanine, faces smiling in front of the glass, was proudly featured. Kalen wasn't in it. He checked the tags. His name wasn't listed. No caption. No presence. Later that afternoon, he passed the company's digital directory display in the executive lounge. It was a sleek, touch-responsive panel showing every team leader's headshot, title, department, and alma mater. Yale, Princeton, Harvard, Stanford. The logos flickered like varsity banners. When Kalen found his profile, it was bare bones. No logo, just his name, his department, and under education, not applicable pending verification. Someone had entered that deliberately. It wasn't an omission, it was a statement. Still, he told himself it might have been a glitch, a careless oversight from a bloated system, a mistake that would be corrected once he had a proper desk, a full staff, and his schedule locked in. But as he stepped into the building, badge scanned, and made his way toward the conference wing, he was met by a cold, metallic screen on the wall near the elevator bay flashing his name in red. Meeting, 8:30 a.m. Status, missed. Confused, Kalen pulled up his email. His printed schedule clearly stated a 9 a.m. strategy debrief. He scrolled. The calendar had been updated sometime after midnight. No alert, no flag, no warning. He checked the timestamps. Someone had rescheduled his invite manually, but he hadn't been notified. It wasn't just a glitch. He rushed to the third-floor conference hall, only to find the glass doors closed, a whiteboard reading session in progress, do not enter blocking the entrance. Behind the tinted panels, he could make out silhouettes, heard muffled conversation, and caught sight of a digital timer ticking down a presentation. He stood outside, waiting in full view of passing staff for the remaining 27 minutes of the meeting. When the doors opened, a few senior executives exited with coffee cups in hand and sidelong glances that said everything their words didn't. One of them, Greg Varner, director of forecasting, paused briefly, smiled thinly, and muttered, "You missed a hell of a session, Rhodes." Kalen started to respond, but stopped. It would sound like an excuse, and excuses were the quickest path to irrelevance here. At his temporary desk, Kalen tried again to log into the internal knowledge base, hoping to review what he'd missed. The access denied message was now permanent. Your credentials do not permit entry into the strategy core. His email request for access, flagged urgent, had been marked resolved by IT without response. When he asked in person, the technician squinted at his badge and said flatly, "I thought that was for regional ops. I'll double-check your role." That afternoon, while grabbing a bottle of water in the break room, Kalen overheard a junior analyst discussing calendar permissions. She mentioned offhandedly how certain assistants had back-end privileges to correct director-level entries if they're not aligned with leadership. It wasn't phrased as sabotage. It was framed as order maintenance, as if someone like him having an incorrect meeting time was simply the system auto-correcting itself, as if his presence in their space had been the anomaly. The next morning, Kalen found a printed memo on his desk, a memo no one else had received in print, regarding the executive parking restructure. It congratulated the leadership team on their new assigned indoor VIP spots and included a map of the facility's layout, with Kalen's name missing. He walked to the security office for clarification. They pulled up his file and confirmed plainly that he was not eligible for garage-level access, then directed him to Lot C, the auxiliary lot behind the building, past the loading dock, partially graveled and fully exposed to the weather. That afternoon it rained. Hard. By the time Kalen reached his car, his leather shoes were soaked, the hem of his pants speckled with mud. He didn't speak on the drive home. He simply drove in silence, the city lights blurring past his windshield. The next week brought more subtle shifts, none of them random. Meeting rooms listed Kalin as an optional attendee, even when he was supposed to lead. Print jobs sent from his ID disappeared mid-queue. A presentation he'd prepared, one that had taken hours to design, was accidentally overwritten by a different deck bearing another director's name. When he confronted the oversight, the other director, Everchase, smiled without warmth and said, "You know how messy the shared drives are. Honestly, it's hard to track anything without formal ownership tags. Maybe stick to PDF locks next time." The room chuckled lightly. Kalin didn't. He stood motionless, swallowed the reply that burned on his tongue, and said only, "Noted." That Friday, after staying late to clean up and rework his portion of the quarterly plan, after everyone else had left, lights dimmed, janitorial carts humming quietly in the hallway, Kalin opened his laptop to find a calendar alert. Weekly leadership sync. Location updated. The new location was a building across the street in Varelia's satellite office, where overflow teams often worked. Kalin shut his laptop, packed his things, and walked into the night. On the sidewalk, the wind cut deep through his coat. Traffic lights blinked red against glass. He paused halfway across the crosswalk, looking up at the main tower, the one he'd spent years climbing toward, its floors glowing with artificial brilliance. He stood there for several minutes, watching that building like someone studying the home of a stranger who used to be a friend. That night, his shoulders slumped just slightly more than usual. By the third week, Kalin had come to understand that what he was facing wasn't a matter of administrative disorganization or oversight, but rather a precise and intentional slow-burn erasure. It became clear in the subtleties, the quiet recalibration of perception, the orchestrated manipulation of public image through internal systems that made his presence feel like an anomaly and his efforts seem like mediocrity. No one told him he didn't belong, yet every action whispered it. The professional evaluations were the tipping point, and Kalin knew at the moment he opened the document. It had arrived via internal HR link, like every quarterly review, in a standardized format filled with numerical ratings, benchmark comparisons, and behavioral summaries. He had prepared for this evaluation, knew his KPIs by heart, had over-delivered in 4 key initiatives, and led 2 pilot programs that reduced cost overhead by nearly 14% across distribution. His analytics reports had been cited in 2 company-wide memos by the CFO. And yet, when he clicked into the report, what greeted him was not excellence. His scores had all been marked at a 2.8, rounded down from the minimum 3.0 required for leadership track eligibility. Not once, not in just one area. Every metric across performance, initiative, collaboration, leadership readiness, all at 2.8. Too low to rise, too high to fire. He read through the justification bullets and saw phrases like adequate effort shown and inconsistent visibility. He sat there for nearly 10 minutes, rereading the same paragraph, waiting for his own comprehension to catch up with the absurdity. When he submitted a polite, formal inquiry asking if the numbers reflected a mistake, he received a response 20 minutes later from HR. It said simply, "Metrics reviewed and confirmed. Continue to seek growth opportunities." That was the moment he knew he was being calibrated into invisibility. Later that day, he passed by the open door of the break room just as someone was slicing cake and arranging balloons. A group stood gathered around a manager whose birthday had triggered the system's internal celebration alert, an automated tradition that had been part of company culture for years. Kalin smiled faintly, remembering how he'd once found the gesture charming, even comforting, in its predictability. But that feeling dimmed later that week when his own birthday came. He didn't expect much. Maybe a group message, a digital card, even a quick automated ping. But the silence that met him that morning was unmistakable. The system had nothing to say. No email, no pop-up, no notification. He passed the main monitor in the open area where names and birthday messages scrolled daily in soft cursive font across a white screen. That day, the screen was blank between April 16th and April 18th. He stared at the gap. It wasn't a system failure. The days around his name were present and formatted properly. It was as if the company calendar had hiccuped, skipped over him, like a song lyric edited out of a remix. Still, he pressed forward. He worked longer hours, sent more detailed follow-ups, double-checked every line in his reports. He started arriving before sunrise to prep meeting rooms and took handwritten notes during presentations just in case his electronic files were lost again. He offered assistance to teams outside his department, responded to late-night project alerts without being asked, and made sure every deliverable arrived polished, tagged, and timestamped. None of it mattered. His next team engagement survey labeled him as less involved and lacking visibility. The comment section quoted anonymous sources saying he seemed disengaged and uninvested in the company's social environment. Kalen laughed out loud when he read that. A soft, dry sound with no humor. He knew exactly what it meant. Because he didn't go drinking at the rooftop bar with them, because he didn't joke about alma maters he hadn't attended, because he didn't laugh at passive digs wrapped in irony. That was what uninvested meant now. That Friday, his department received a surprise, the annual vision board exercise, in which directors submitted visual summaries of their strategic goals and inspirations for the next fiscal year. Everyone presented theirs on glossy prints or sleek animations. Kalen, who had prepared his the week before and sent it to be printed at the Executive Services Hub, arrived to find no file in the system. The technician shrugged. Maybe you uploaded to the wrong folder? When Kalen offered to resend the file, he was told printing was now closed for submissions. With no visuals in hand, he had to improvise. He stood in front of his colleagues, describing charts and images that no one would ever see. Someone in the back snorted when he said transformational data layers. He never found out who. The following Monday, Kalen found that his laptop password had been reset. No warning. When he called IT, they told him the system flagged abnormal usage. It took 4 hours for him to regain access, during which time the leadership team had completed a compliance review based on a report he'd written, without his input. His name didn't appear on the credits. Later that day, an email circulated with kudos to several directors for exceptional insights. One of the points listed had been taken, word for word, from Kalen's original draft. He sat back in his chair, stared at the glowing screen, and felt something hollow open behind his ribs. It wasn't rage. Not yet. It was the growing certainty that he was slowly being dismantled not through confrontation, but through omission. After the performance sabotage and public omission of his birthday, Kalen threw himself into work with the hope that undeniable results might begin to shift perceptions, or at least anchor him to something tangible. And for a brief moment, it seemed to pay off. During a mid-month strategy sync, the Executive VP of International Operations publicly named him as the lead for an upcoming cross-border pilot program, a prestigious project that involved coordination across 3 regions and direct collaboration with 2 external clients in Europe. The room had gone silent when his name was spoken. A few glanced over at him, some surprised, others skeptical. Kalen gave a single, respectful nod and quickly jotted notes, already mapping timelines in his head. That project, he knew, could reset everything. He spent that week working 18-hour days. He built a comprehensive proposal, drafted stakeholder roadmaps, led discovery calls with the regional liaisons, and uploaded a working model to the shared executive folder. By the weekend, he had finalized a 42-page brief, complete with projected timelines, staffing requests, and risk assessments. The document was saved under the folder titled Kalen_Rhodes_ Global Pilot. But when Monday came, something fell off. The calendar invites for the global sync were gone. He couldn't find the project folder where he'd left it. He checked the shared drive, searched every variant of the project name, and even dug through the server logs. Nothing. Later that day, during a hallway conversation with a colleague from legal, Kalen casually asked whether she'd seen the latest outline for the pilot. She paused, puzzled, then said she thought Everett Chase had taken point on that assignment. Confused, Kalen returned to his desk and pulled up the corporate dashboard. There it was, the updated assignment sheet. Project Lead Everett Chase. Deputy Layla Monroe, an executive assistant who had only joined the company 4 weeks ago. His name didn't appear anywhere on the document. There were no edit notes, no change logs referencing him. It was as if his involvement had never existed. When he called the coordinator to inquire, she hesitated and then said, almost apologetically, that leadership had decided to reframe the project under a different approach. No explanation, no attribution, no mention of his original brief. It had been erased quietly, as if his work had never been real to begin with. That same week, the company distributed uniforms for the upcoming International Industry Summit, a high-profile event where Verellia would be showcasing innovation and cross-regional unity. Employees across departments received personalized garment bags with tailored black blazers, matching branded shirts, and subtle silver embroidery bearing the company crest. Kalen received his late. When the courier finally delivered the package, it was lighter than expected. Inside, instead of the official uniform, there was a single dark gray jacket unembellished, with a tag-marked sample non-production unit. There was no shirt, no crest, no embroidery. Confused, Kalen brought the issue to the logistics team, who looked at his order record and casually said, "Looks like yours was filed under prototype tier." Might have been a classification issue. Those are usually issued to support staff, not client-facing execs. Kalen stood still for a moment, watching them scroll past his name on the screen like it was just another typo, just another misfiled piece of the machine. No one offered to fix it. No one offered an apology. They just moved on to the next task, and he left with the jacket still folded under his arm, unworn. When the summit began, Kalen entered the venue among a sea of colleagues clad in sleek black. Their jackets shimmered subtly beneath the lights, the crest catching flashes of camera bulbs as reporters moved through the lobby. Kalen moved quietly along the perimeter, his dull gray jacket making him look like a misplaced contractor. People barely glanced at him. During the group photo, before the keynote, the lead photographer waved him to the far edge of the frame, then cropped the shot tighter before publishing it to the company's social feed. In the final image, Kalen's elbow was barely visible at the corner, a ghost limb cut off mid-pose. The caption listed the names of everyone present, down to junior analysts, everyone but him. At the breakout panels, he tried to offer insights during a discussion on global fulfillment metrics, referencing data from his pilot brief, only to be interrupted mid-sentence by Everett, who redirected the conversation and repeated a paraphrased version of Kalen's point. The audience nodded. The moderator gave Everett the floor. Kalen was never asked to continue. Afterward, at the networking mixer, he stood near the coffee bar for almost an hour. Not one person approached him. Eventually, he walked outside, took off the unbranded jacket, folded it carefully, and laid it across the back seat of a cab. That night, he didn't go home. He rode around the city, watching the glowing skyline blur past the windows, thinking of how an entire system could shift just enough to unseat someone without ever pushing directly. Back at the office the following week, Kalen received a standard post-event feedback form. He filled it out with restraint, writing carefully crafted notes about logistical inconsistencies and data gaps in the summit's presentations. He kept his head down, remained cordial, didn't press about the erased project, and offered a congratulatory email to Everett Chase that went unanswered. Still, Kalen hoped that if he delivered again, if he created something undeniable, he could shift the narrative. That week, he completed a workflow optimization plan for the logistics branch that forecasted an annual savings of $1.7 million. His report was thorough, his graphs clean, his data airtight. When he submitted it through the internal system, he flagged it for the strategic leads, requested review, and, once again, received no reply. Days passed, then a full week, and then came the email that reminded Kalen just how carefully he was being managed into invisibility. It was an all-hands announcement. Invitation to quarterly leadership growth workshop. The message was sleek, corporate, and energetic. Congratulations to a selected group of directors and senior strategists chosen for a half-day session on advanced influence, communications, and cross-functional leadership. The kind of session that led to upward mobility. It was, Kalen knew, one of the few direct pipelines to VP-level mentorship. His name wasn't on the invite. At first, he thought maybe it had been a clerical error again. Maybe the system had dropped his name or misfiled his level. But when he checked with IT, the response was clear and immediate. Per access control settings, your user ID is not currently flagged for leadership-level programming. If this is an error, please speak to your department head. Kalen didn't respond. He didn't speak to anyone. He sat at his desk with the message open, rereading the sentence like a puzzle whose solution didn't exist. His badge still read director. His responsibilities still matched those of his peers. But the system, either by order or design, no longer saw him as someone who needed to be prepared for growth. That Friday, Varelia unveiled a new internal campaign titled Faces of Excellence. Digital wall panels along the main hallway now featured looping presentations with photos of award-winning teams and highlighted individuals who had modeled company values through outstanding execution. As Kalen walked through the corridor that morning, he paused when he saw one of the frames. The background was unmistakable, a distribution center he had overseen during his first major rollout. The team was celebrating the launch of the Phoenix Initiative, a project he had designed and managed from inception to deployment. The screen changed again, this time showing the final phase of the rollout. Kalen recognized his posture in the frame, his stance, the exact moment when he'd handed the signed completion papers to the on-site logistics lead. But his face was blurred, softly, imperfectly, like someone had used a low-grade filter to hide a bystander. It wasn't a glitch. No one else in the photo was affected. Their names and roles flashed proudly beneath the caption. His was absent. There wasn't even a not-pictured note. It was as though he'd been retroactively turned into a background prop, his presence acknowledged only through physical posture, but scrubbed from identity. He went straight to corporate communications to ask about the photo. A junior assistant smiled blankly, looked up the image ID in the system, and after a few keystrokes, said, "Oh, looks like your profile's not linked to this campaign. Maybe it didn't register." She then added, "The blur is probably an auto-protection feature. Sometimes it activates when metadata's incomplete. Nothing personal." She said it with such practiced neutrality that Kalen had no choice but to nod. He thanked her, turned, and walked back to his desk. That afternoon, he opened his original project folder from the Phoenix Initiative and looked through his archived files. Everything was still there: his plans, his execution calendar, his task force logs. He stared at them for nearly 20 minutes, mouse hovering over the delete key, then closed the folder without touching anything. The next blow came quietly, again wrapped in corporate courtesy. An email from facilities. Subject line: Workspace Transition Notice. It explained that Kalen's current cubicle was being reassigned to a new cross-functional team that needed proximity to operations. He was being relocated 2 floors down, to the same floor as onboarding and procurement, departments where entry-level coordinators sat. The new desk had no nameplate. The monitor was smaller. The phone hadn't been activated yet. His neighbors were all young staffers discussing their weekend plans and onboarding processes. No one greeted him. No one recognized him. No one cared. His director-level ID allowed him access to dashboards most people around him had never seen, but physically, he was back on the periphery, and the move made it official. Still, Kalen kept showing up. He kept submitting plans. He kept offering solutions. One morning, he posted a proposal to the shared drive detailing a logistics escalation system designed to cut processing delays by 35%. He received a response a day later. An automated message saying his submission had been rerouted to the Innovation Overflow Repository, a newly created section of the internal server that, from what Kalen could tell, no one actually monitored. It was where ideas went to die. Invitations arrived by email in a sleek package inviting all directors and key strategists to participate in brainstorming groups, a marquee event for those eager to showcase thought leadership. His inbox confirmed his attendance with a confirmed group number and assigned room on the 8th floor. He arrived early, prepared, portfolio in hand, ready to engage. The room was silent, lit by harsh fluorescent bulbs, sterile walls adorned with whiteboards and sticky notes. Minutes ticked by. No other participants arrived. He checked his phone for updates. Nothing. He reached out to the seminar coordinator through the corporate chat system. Her response was robotic, suggesting the AI had assigned groups based on a complex algorithm and that his placement was correct. She added they could not manually override the system. Kalen stared at the empty seats across the table, their backs turned to him like ghosts. It was a room full of potential ideas that would never be shared, a conversation that would never begin. After 45 minutes, he quietly packed his things and left, feeling the weight of solitude press deeper. Back on the main floor, the atmosphere hummed with collaboration, laughter, and clinking glasses from coffee mugs held by colleagues who discussed bold concepts and exchanged contact information. Kalen wandered past the cafe area, where an advanced coffee machine stood as a symbol of corporate culture. Custom espresso, latte art, a place to gather and recharge. The machine used facial recognition to personalize drinks and track consumption for billing and wellness programs. Employees queued with smiles, cups filling with fragrant foam. Kalen approached and held out his company ID to the scanner. The screen blinked red. Denied. He tried again. Denied again. His profile was not registered for this service. With a small sigh, Kalen turned away. He retrieved a plastic bottle of water from the vending machine down the hall, feeling the cool condensation in his hand as he stepped into the solitude of a narrow corridor to drink. Day after day, he watched others gather around the coffee station, their laughter a distant echo, a reminder of exclusion rendered physical and unavoidable. His physical workspace, relocated weeks earlier to a lower floor near procurement and onboarding, offered little refuge. Surrounded by entry-level staff and assistants, Kalen felt both out of place and under siege. The hum of printers and chatter about training modules was a far cry from the boardroom discussions and high-stakes planning he was accustomed to. One afternoon, a young coordinator from HR paused near his desk to ask if he needed help setting up his computer. He smiled politely and declined, but the interaction left him feeling like a relic, someone who had fallen through the cracks of a machine designed to process and discard. Emails and digital communications became the primary, often only, link to his former world. Yet even here, barriers emerged. His messages to leadership groups were frequently marked as read, but never answered. Project threads he initiated were buried under layers of forwarded chains and reassignments. His calendar was often mysteriously cleared or blocked by overlapping meetings he wasn't invited to. The culmination of these digital sidelining tactics culminated in an incident with the company's internal social platform, an app where employees shared wins, photos, and announcements. Kalen attempted to post a congratulatory message for a teammate's promotion. The post disappeared within minutes, unacknowledged and unshared. No error message, no explanation. It was as if the platform itself rejected his voice. Beyond the digital and social erasure, Kalen's physical health began to suffer under the stress of this relentless exclusion. The extended hours in a fluorescent-lit cubicle without windows, the absence of informal peer support, and the need to constantly prove himself without acknowledgement took a toll. The company's wellness program offered counseling services, but requests for appointments were delayed due to high demand. The weight of invisibility was not only psychological but corporeal. In one particularly stark moment, Kalen realized he had lost track of the last time he had sat down to a proper lunch. Office events featuring catered meals were posted on bulletin boards and internal forums. All were marked RSVP required, and invitations were routed through teams and departments from which he was increasingly excluded. On occasion, he would receive a brief notification that an event was sold out, though he had never requested an invitation. Meals brought to his desk were sparse, plain sandwiches or fruit cups, contrasted sharply against the catered buffets elsewhere. He began to eat at his desk, chewing slowly, eyes lowered, avoiding the occasional glance from passers-by who might silently judge his reduced status. This ongoing isolation, both social and procedural, extended even into informal office rituals. The end-of-week happy hour, a casual gathering known for fostering networking and mentorship, was repeatedly organized without his knowledge. Colleagues who had once spoken to him casually would return his nod with curt silence or glance away as he approached. The distance was palpable. One morning, Kalin attempted to enter the executive elevator, a privilege long associated with his title. His access card was denied at the terminal. He presented his ID to security personnel, who looked him up and down with thinly veiled skepticism before explaining that current building regulations limit executive floor access to active project leads. He protested, but no supervisor was available. Left with no options, Kalin took the stairs, passing floors filled with buzzing conversations and windowed offices where his peers continued their work. Each step felt heavier than the last. Amidst these mounting barriers, Kalin held onto moments of clarity and resolve. He maintained detailed notes of every instance of exclusion or sabotage, filing screenshots, saving emails, recording times and dates. He quietly sought allies in IT and HR, but found those doors closed or redirected. Still, he refused to let the silence define him. It was during one particularly tense Monday morning strategy session, attended by Verelia's executive leadership and department heads, that the first real cracks appeared in the corporate facade. The meeting convened in the glass-encased boardroom on the 23rd floor, a place reserved for high-level confidential discussions, and Kalin sat at the far end of the mahogany table, his posture calm but his eyes alert. As the chief operating officer distributed copies of the company's newly drafted operational protocols, documents stamped confidential and classified, Kalin noticed something unusual. Each folder bore a printed label with the recipient's full name in precise corporate font, carefully placed in the upper right corner of the front page. Kalin's folder was among them, the label crisp, the paper pristine. Yet when the meeting moved into its detailed review phase, Kalin found himself alone in possession of a copy that was printed not from the company's central secure printer, but from a remote, unregistered device with a login Kalinar. A peripheral printer located in a discrete maintenance area rarely used by others. Curious, he raised a hand to point this out. The COO, preoccupied, waved a dismissive hand and said, "Technical anomaly. No impact on content. Proceed." Kalin's pulse quickened, but he kept his voice steady as he requested IT to audit the source of document distribution. The minutes ticked by, layered with complex discussion on policy updates and implementation strategies. Several executives spoke with practiced ease, oblivious to the undercurrent stirring beneath the surface. When the session adjourned, Kalin quietly asked the IT lead for a full print log of all confidential document outputs. The reply arrived hours later. While all others had been printed from approved corporate devices, every file was accounted for except his. His folder was the only one traced to that mysterious Kalinar terminal. The discovery was startling. It suggested Kalin's access had not been rescinded, but rather carefully cloaked, allowing him to possess information while simultaneously isolating him from the mainstream channels of distribution. The printer was effectively a hidden portal, granting him a facade of inclusion but barring genuine participation. The irony wasn't lost on Kalin. He had become the keeper of keys no one else was supposed to see. Later that week, the annual shareholder meeting agenda was finalized and circulated. Kalin, despite months of exclusion, remained a registered member of the board with voting rights. The meeting was set to reveal the company's financial status, strategy outlook, and ownership distribution, details that Kalin had watched ebb away from his influence since his arrival. At the meeting, the CFO presented a comprehensive breakdown of the company's equity movements over the past 12 months. As slides advanced, a graph showing share distribution painted a startling picture. A single entity or network had quietly acquired over 62% of the voting shares, shifting control decisively. Whispers rippled through the room. The board members exchanged puzzled looks. The CFO then revealed the audit trail behind these transactions. Every purchase had been signed and verified by a trusted auditor with impeccable credentials, a figure known to the company for his integrity and thoroughness. The presentation included a brief biography of the auditor, who was not a distant corporate figure, but a personal mentor to Kalin during his early college years at the community campus. The audience looked at Kalin, who sat with measured composure, feeling the tension swell in the room. The revelation was subtle but profound. The silent power shifting beneath the surface was linked to him, whether or not the board realized it. In the days that followed, Kalin received a confidential briefing from a trusted ally within the legal department. She revealed that the ownership transfer had been orchestrated through a series of shell companies and trusts, all connected by a network that traced back to Kalin's early entrepreneurial ventures. These entities had accumulated stock quietly, outside of public knowledge, strategically buying up shares from passive investors and small stakeholders. The magnitude of control now wielded through these holdings meant that Kalin was, in fact, the largest single shareholder in Varelia Corporation, though this truth was hidden behind layers of corporate obfuscation and non-disclosure agreements. Yet, while Kalin's power had grown in the shadows, his day-to-day existence within the company remained fraught with exclusion and marginalization. The company's operational leadership had no idea that the man they ignored and sidelined was the same individual behind the latest wave of corporate consolidation. This dissonance created an invisible shield for Kalin's ascent. It was both a fortress and a prison. He possessed the means to influence the company's direction, but lacked the conventional authority to exercise it openly. Throughout this period, Kalin maintained a careful balance, never revealing the full extent of his stake, never asserting dominance prematurely, and always moving with calculated patience. Executives dressed in their finest suits filed into the main auditorium, the stage bathed in soft white light, polished to corporate perfection. Flags bearing the company emblem flanked the podium. The seats were filled with the familiar faces of Varelia's top brass, investors, board members, and department leaders, all anticipating announcements that would define the next chapter of the firm's evolution. Kalin entered not as an invitee, but as the central figure. His arrival was unheralded. There were no cameras rolling, no grand introductions, no speeches to precede him. Instead, the doors to the side entrance quietly opened, and Kalin walked into the wings with steady steps, dressed impeccably in a tailored black suit with a subtle sheen that caught the stage lights. His expression was composed, unreadable, and without a badge or title pinned to his lapel. A single leather-bound binder rested in his hands, its cover embossed with minimalist gold lettering, KR Trust Trademark Registration. The room's ambient noise dimmed as the event coordinator signaled the beginning of the presentation. The Master of Ceremonies announced the arrival of the new representative of future ownership, a phrase repeated across internal emails, but never fully explained. Kalin stepped forward to the podium, opened the binder to the first page, and without a microphone, began to speak with a voice both calm and resolute. His words echoed in the hushed room, detailing the formation of KR Trust, a newly established entity holding the controlling interest of Varelia Corporation. The binder revealed legal documents, endorsements, and corporate seals, signifying a decisive transfer of ownership rights. No visuals distracted the audience. Kalin's presence alone commanded attention. As he turned pages, the room absorbed the gravity of the moment. Simultaneously, across every screen in Varelia's headquarters, from lobby displays to conference rooms and executive offices, a synchronized update flickered and transformed the familiar company logo. The traditional emblem was overlaid with a new subtitle, under the guardianship of Rhodes International Group, founded by Midwest alumni. Employees paused in their routines to glance at monitors, now displaying this bold declaration. Whispers spread quickly through hallways, water coolers, and cafeterias. Staff members who had once overlooked or actively sidelined Kalin now confronted the undeniable truth. The man they had erased was, in fact, the principal owner of the very corporation they served. The event progressed with an understated dignity. No fanfare, no ostentatious displays, only a quiet, unshakable reality settling into the collective consciousness of the company. The board chairman offered a brief acknowledgement, recognizing the transition as a new era defined by heritage, resilience, and strategic vision. Investors and key stakeholders nodded. The weight of years of concealed transactions and silent acquisitions now materialized in one person. Questions followed in subdued tones, but were met with carefully crafted responses emphasizing continuity and growth under the new guardianship. Outside the auditorium, a few senior executives gathered in small clusters, their faces reflecting surprise, some skepticism, others reluctant acceptance. Everchase, who had long benefited from Kalen's erasure, exchanged a tense glance with the legal counsel who had overseen the shareholder agreements. The undercurrent was clear. The game had changed irrevocably. Kalen retreated afterward to a private conference room where a trusted circle of confidants awaited. Among them was the mentor auditor who had guided him years before at community college, now a key architect behind the KR trust structure. They reviewed plans to implement cultural reforms, diversity initiatives, and transparency measures designed to dismantle the toxic systems that had oppressed Kalen. Legal strategies to protect minority shareholders and enforce ethical governance were outlined with precision. This was more than a personal victory. It was the beginning of a corporate reckoning. In the days that followed, internal communications were flooded with messages from Kalen outlining his vision for Virelia's future. Town halls were scheduled. Webinars on equity and inclusion were launched. Kalen made himself visible in a way that was both strategic and sincere, sharing his story in a corporate blog post that acknowledged the barriers he faced and inviting open dialogue about systemic inequities within the company. His tone was measured but unflinching, blending humility with resolve. External media outlets, initially unaware of the ownership shift, began to pick up on the story. Business journals and industry analysts dissected the unusual transition, highlighting Kalen's ascent from marginalized employee to majority shareholder. Social media buzzed with commentary on diversity in leadership and the quiet power of resilience. Within Virelia, employees who had once whispered in hallways now found themselves attending forums where Kalen spoke candidly about overcoming prejudice and transforming corporate culture. The quiet exile Kalen had endured for months had shifted to a decisive campaign aimed at dismantling the old guard who had once attempted to erase him. This stage was marked not only by strategic moves, but by a palpable upheaval in the company's power dynamics. The morning air was thick with anticipation as the company's internal security system initiated a mass reset of executive access credentials. What initially appeared as a routine security upgrade soon morphed into an unmistakable purge of power. Department heads, vice presidents, and senior managers tried swiping their badges at restricted elevator banks, only to be met with a cold rejection of flashing red lights and locked doors. Confused murmurs spread rapidly through office floors as frustrated executives attempted alternative entries, only to be met by equally impenetrable barriers. Meanwhile, Kalen's badge, now embossed with the official KR Trust emblem, worked flawlessly, granting him unrestricted access across every floor, every conference room, every executive suite. As he strode through the glass corridors, the elevator's synthesized voice welcomed him with a warm, personalized greeting. "Welcome, executive owner." It was a sound that had once seemed distant and unattainable, but now resonated as both a symbol and a promise of his reclaimed authority. Colleagues who had once ignored him averted their eyes or murmured subdued greetings, realizing that the tides of change were no longer a rumor, but a confirmed reality. At precisely 6 a.m., the company's communication systems delivered a sweeping memo to every employee's inbox. The subject line was terse and commanding: Ethics Purge. The message outlined the commencement of a comprehensive internal review aimed at rooting out unethical behavior and reinforcing the company's commitment to integrity, inclusion, and respect. Attached was a detailed list naming 5 senior executives who were subject to immediate demotion and reassignment pending further investigation. What sent shockwaves through the company was not just the names themselves, but the weight of the allegations tied to each. The report contained meticulously documented evidence of racial discrimination, microaggressions, and systemic harassment, collected over months through a confidential, anonymous reporting tool Kalen had spearheaded in the earliest days of his tenure. The tool allowed employees to safely report instances of bias and misconduct, bypassing traditional channels known for inaction or retaliation. The investigation team had been thorough, cross-referencing emails, meeting recordings, and witness testimonies to build airtight cases against those named. Among the demoted was Carter Shaw, the human resources director who had once mocked Kalen's background openly, relegated him to the shadows, and led efforts to stifle his ascent. His removal marked a symbolic victory for those who had suffered under his watch. Others included high-ranking executives who had facilitated or turned a blind eye to discriminatory practices, ensuring that the toxic culture endured. The message was clear: the era of unchecked privilege and covert sabotage was over. Within hours, the company's atmosphere shifted dramatically. Rumors swirled, alliances fractured, and whispered conversations filled the halls. Employees who had been silent witnesses to exclusion and bias now found their voices empowered, cautiously hopeful that change was not only possible but inevitable. Open forums and support groups formed overnight, backed by leadership commitments to transparency and reform. Kalin, however, remained focused on the long game. He knew that purging a handful of individuals was only the first step toward healing the deep wounds of institutional discrimination. The structural changes necessary to cultivate genuine equity required patience, vigilance, and relentless advocacy. He convened a series of meetings with his trusted legal, HR, and diversity officers to draft policies that would embed accountability into every level of the organization. Training programs were expanded, reporting mechanisms enhanced, and leadership pipelines re-examined to prioritize inclusion without tokenism. The demoted executives, meanwhile, faced public and private repercussions. Some attempted to fight their reassignment, citing procedural errors and questioning the validity of anonymous reports. Others retreated quietly, recognizing the shifting winds and preparing for careers beyond Varelia. The company's board, largely supportive of Kalin's direction, oversaw the transition with a mix of caution and resolve. The weeks following the fall of the corporate giants were a time of both rebuilding and reflection within Varelia Corporation. The once rigid walls of exclusion began to echo with conversations previously muted, and a palpable shift took hold in the company's culture. But for Kalin Rhodes, this was more than a change of policy or personnel. It was the culmination of a long, arduous journey from invisibility to leadership, from silent suffering to empowered agency. As the company transitioned into a new era under his guidance, Kalin understood that true transformation demanded more than just reform. It required an enduring statement, a living testament to resilience and the unyielding pursuit of justice. Recognizing the profound power of symbolism, Kalin spearheaded the creation of a space within the heart of the Varelia headquarters, an installation both physical and conceptual, known simply as the Recognition Room. Situated prominently in the main lobby, this glass-encased sanctuary was designed not just as a tribute to individual achievements, but as a celebration of collective humanity and shared progress. It featured interactive screens displaying continuous loops of candid moments throughout the company, employees holding doors for one another, assisting with forgotten documents, collaborating across departments, small gestures that embody respect and dignity. Among these, Kalin's own images appeared repeatedly, not as a figure demanding attention, but as one embodying quiet strength. Helping a colleague pick up dropped papers, nodding encouragement during a difficult meeting, standing aside in an elevator to let others pass first. These images spoke volumes without words, conveying a message of humility, persistence, and the subtle power of everyday kindness. The unveiling of the Recognition Room was accompanied by a company-wide manifesto, posted in every corridor, meeting room, and digital dashboard. The text was succinct yet profound. They may not see you. That doesn't mean you don't matter. Silence isn't weakness. It's preparation. And justice doesn't need to speak, only to arrive. These words reverberated throughout the organization, touching employees who had felt unseen or unheard for years. It was a promise and a challenge, inviting all to participate in a culture where respect was earned through actions, not titles, and where silence could signal strength rather than surrender. Kalin made it clear that the Recognition Room was not a monument to his own journey, but a mirror reflecting the countless untold stories of perseverance within the company. He launched initiatives encouraging employees to nominate peers for Quiet Heroism Awards, recognitions for those who contributed without fanfare, but whose efforts kept the company's heart beating. These awards highlighted acts often overlooked, a team member who stayed late to support a struggling colleague, a manager who advocated for fair scheduling, a receptionist who learned sign language to assist hearing-impaired visitors. Through these stories, Kaylin fostered a narrative that elevated empathy and inclusion as cornerstones of success. In leadership meetings and public addresses, Kaylin continued to emphasize that progress was neither linear nor guaranteed. He acknowledged the scars left by years of discrimination and the resistance to change that still simmered beneath the surface. He shared his personal history candidly, not as a call for sympathy, but as evidence that transformation was possible when courage met opportunity. His speeches were grounded in realism, urging patience and persistence while insisting on accountability. He believed that silence before justice was not submission but preparation, a deliberate gathering of strength for a pivotal moment. Outside the company walls, Kaylin's story resonated widely. His blog posts, interviews, and keynote speeches became platforms for advocacy on diversity, equity, and inclusion. He spoke about the complex nature of power, the importance of structural change, and the necessity of lifting voices historically marginalized in corporate spaces. His message transcended Varelia, inspiring leaders in other industries to examine their own cultures and systems. The media framed Kaylin as a figure of quiet revolution, a leader whose strength came not from loud proclamations, but from unyielding integrity and strategic patience. Internally, the transformation was measured not only by policies implemented, but by shifts in daily interactions. New mentorship programs paired senior leaders with employees from underrepresented groups. Training on unconscious bias and systemic inequities became standard. Recruitment efforts prioritized diverse candidates with clear pathways for growth. The company's annual survey showed marked improvements in employee satisfaction, particularly among those who had previously felt marginalized. Still, Kaylin reminded his teams that vigilance was essential. Progress could never be assumed permanent without ongoing effort. As months turned into years, Kaylin's leadership style evolved into one defined by listening and learning. He held regular open-door sessions, inviting feedback from all levels of the organization, fostering a culture of transparency and mutual respect. He championed innovation not just in products and services, but in workplace culture, encouraging experimentation with new ideas to foster inclusion and collaboration. His vision was a company where success was measured not only by profit margins, but by the well-being and growth of every individual. The legacy Kaylin sought to build was clear: a corporation that recognized the strength in diversity, that understood silence could be the prelude to profound change, and that justice, while sometimes delayed, would ultimately prevail through deliberate and sustained action. His journey from exclusion to ownership was a testament to the power of resilience and strategic vision, a beacon for those who have ever felt unseen or undervalued. The end. If you're enjoying this story and want to see more gripping tales like Kaylin's, don't forget to like and subscribe. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of the plot surprised you the most? And where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and join the conversation. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories your way.